Hey, it's Greg Brown, the storyteller, poet laureate of aviation. Grab your logbook, because it's time for another flying carpet cockpit adventure. I'm an aviation author, adventure columnist, photographer, and former National Flight Instructor of the Year. The Flying Carpet is a 4-place single-engine light airplane. In it, my wife Jean and I have long traveled the North American continent, searching behind clouds for the real America. Learn more at my website, gregbrownflyingcarpet.com, where you can also see photos from most episodes. While there, order one of the few remaining autographed copies of my aviation adventure book, Flying Carpet, The Soul of an Airplane, for which I was named Barnes & Noble Arizona Author of the Month. There's lots of magic in being a pilot. Obviously, the adventures of mastering flight, overcoming challenges to reach your destinations, and amazing views out the windshield are at the heart of that magic. But there's more. The friendships, shared wisdom, and companionship that arise between pilots. When a student pilot, an airline pilot, and a fighter pilot meet, an instant bond forms between them. Despite differences in experience and professional status, they instantly enjoy the camaraderie of aviators. For this reason, attending fly-in events is a thrill for virtually every aviator, regardless of professional status or background. No friends there when you arrive? There certainly will be before you leave. Okay, folks, climb aboard my flying carpet, buckle up your seatbelt, and prepare for takeoff on today's episode, In Search of Lost Time, the magic of being a pilot. Clear prop. Where the heck is my watch? I wondered, upon checking my wrist for the current time. Jean and I were dining with aviation author and humorist Rod Machado, his wife Diane, and two of their friends at an outdoor cafe in Palm Springs. We were here joining pilots from all over the country for the annual Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association Expo. So, Greg, said Rod, continuing a conversation in progress, how was your flight from Phoenix yesterday? Very pleasant, I replied, massaging my empty wrist. We arrived early to avoid the heaviest fly-in traffic. It can be a real hornet's nest the afternoon before the program starts. I've often dodged those hornets myself, said Rod. Any delays? None at all, I replied. I just joined the published arrival procedure and followed the freeway in. No circling was required. I suspect it was tougher later in the day. We proceeded to swap aviator stories with Rod and Diane's accompanying friends. Ian, an American Airlines pilot, told of his Alaska flying days. Jason recounted adventures flying his twin-engine Piper Aerostar. Earlier, over appetizers, he'd dazzled the group with mystifying card tricks. All of us were amazed by Jason's performance, including Rod, an accomplished amateur magician himself. Even as flying yarns circled the table, my thoughts kept returning to the missing watch. It wasn't valuable, but I liked it, and the data bank held important phone numbers. Particularly disturbing was that I'd already misplaced a set of keys earlier that morning. Ultimately, I'd found them in the side pocket of my suitcase, but had no recollection of placing them there. Now I'd lost my watch. Hopefully I'm not developing memory problems, I found myself worrying. I must ask Jean if she's noticed any other symptoms. Attempting to banish such concerns from my mind, I returned to my friend's ongoing conversation, saying nothing of my loss. Did I tell you about flying into Long Beach for the last West Coast Expo 2 years ago? I asked. No, said Rod. Did you have some quote-unquote close encounters there? On the contrary, I replied, laughing. The place was deserted when we landed. Where was everybody? Asked Rod. I drove that year since Long Beach is near my home. I explained how Long Beach Airport had been shrouded in low stratus the morning Expo began, so I'd filed an instrument flight plan for the flight from Phoenix. A special reservation was required due to anticipated heavy fly-in traffic. When I radioed for instrument clearance before takeoff, however, I learned that all IFR traffic into Southern California was on indefinite ground hold due to a communications failure at Los Angeles Air Traffic Control Center. What's more, if I departed under visual flight rules, I'd lose my IFR reservation. With Long Beach weather forecast to remain low all day, that could be a problem. While Gene and I sat pondering this at the run-up area, ominous clouds could be seen developing on the horizon. Although VFR at the moment, Arizona had been inundated by thunderstorms the past few days, with more expected that afternoon. Waiting might mean getting grounded overnight, not to mention the likely mess when all those delayed IFR airplanes in surrounding states were released for takeoff at the same time. A tough decision, said Jason. What did you do? Ultimately, I took off VFR anyway, I explained. I figured that even if my destination remained below visual minimums and I couldn't get an instrument clearance, we could always land inland and rent a car for the last 100 miles. That would still beat driving 7 hours from Phoenix if thunderstorms trapped us there later in the day. Of course, immediately after takeoff, I started asking controllers for an IFR clearance to Long Beach. Phoenix departure said no. So did Albuquerque Center. But then a funny thing happened near the Colorado River. What was that? Asked Diane. Upon switching to Los Angeles Center for flight following, I assumed my politest radio voice and said, LA Center, I know it's probably impossible, but is there any way I could get an IFR to Long Beach?
Sure,
replied the LA controller without hesitation.
You're cleared, present position, direct to Long Beach.
As it turned out, the communications outage was between flight service computers and air traffic control. So although flight plans filed through flight service were inaccessible to controllers, air filing was no problem. With few aircraft flying due to the glitch, controllers routed me straight through the normally crowded LA airspace to what's usually one of the nation's busiest fly-ins. Pausing for a moment to check my pockets, the watch wasn't there either. I then described how the flying carpet was one of only 2 aircraft worked by SoCal Approach upon arrival, and how 3 vans converged to greet us at the otherwise empty tie-down area. We rode one of those big shuttle buses to the convention center, I gloated, and chatted with the driver all the way downtown. Gene and I were the only riders. None of my companions had experienced such a VIP arrival to an AOPA fly-in. But even as they mused at the unusual experience, my thoughts returned to the missing timepiece. Mentally, I retraced my steps, visualizing the table where I'd eaten lunch and the bathroom I'd visited afterwards. Perhaps I'd removed the watch while brushing my teeth. That train of thought was momentarily interrupted when Jason produced his deck of cards and began more magic tricks. By now, however, I was so preoccupied with the lost watch that I couldn't pay full attention. Having mentally revisited all other events of the day, I suddenly remembered wearing my watch before entering the very restaurant where we now dined. Being first to arrive, I checked the time while awaiting our companions. "Wait a minute," I blurted, interrupting a card trick. Everyone looked at me. "Jason," I said, "did you take my watch?" "Are you accusing me of something?" answered the magician soberly. "No, but—" Slowly, Jason's lips transformed from the downward curl of perceived insult to the lilt of a devilish grin. "What does your watch look like?" he asked. I described it. The black band with buckle, the silver face, and the red ring in the bezel. Jason glanced sideward, diverting my subconscious attention in that direction. There sat Rod, his elbow on the table and knuckles supporting his chin. For a moment, I thought my fellow columnist was angry with me for insulting his friend. He wore an uncharacteristically blank expression. Embarrassed, I let my eyes drift slowly downward from Rod's face, across his chin and knuckles, and down the arm that supported it. It took me a moment to recognize it, but there, prominently displayed on Rod's wrist and focused in my direction, was my missing watch. How and when Jason succeeded in unbuckling it from my wrist and transferring it to Rod, I don't know. He must have somehow removed it when we first shook hands in greeting. But certainly in this case, I learned that there's more than one kind of magic to being a pilot. A postscript. This event took place in 2002. When Rod Machado introduced me to Jason, I knew no more than that he was a pilot and some sort of magician. So I was mighty impressed by the trick he pulled on me. Sometime afterward, I was surprised to discover Jason performing on TV, on Late Night with Letterman. Turned out he'd made multiple appearances there. In the TV introduction, I learned that Jason was an internationally known magician performing all over the world. And I have to admit I found myself impressed and delighted at having been the unwitting subject of one of his magic tricks. After I recorded this episode, Rod told me that Jason passed away a couple years ago. So then I looked him up and was astonished at what I found. Jason was an amazingly accomplished man in many diverse fields. He'd served as a Harvard professor, for example, and acted in several movies, including Pretty Woman and An Officer and a Gentleman. Some of you will likely recognize his full name, Jason Randall, spelled Randall, one L. If not, do an internet search, and you'll be surprised at all his accomplishments. You'll also find videos of his magic performances. In any case, I hope you've enjoyed hearing me get tricked, big time. Given the backstory, I treasure the memory. Thanks for riding along on today's Flying Carpet adventure. Find photos from most episodes at gregbrownflyingcarpet.com. While there, order one of the few remaining autographed copies of my aviation adventure book, Flying Carpet, The Soul of an Airplane, for which I was named Barnes & Noble Arizona Author of the Month. You'll also find my other aviation books there, and my Views from the Flying Carpet aerial photography available in fine art metal prints. Please support this podcast by sharing your favorite episodes on social media, posting reviews on your favorite podcast directories, and donating via gregbrownflyingcarpet.com. I welcome your feedback via my website, via my Flying Carpet Podcast Facebook group. Finally, follow my social media sites by searching Greg Brown Flying Carpet. and consider joining my Student Pilot Pep Talk Facebook group. Thanks, Carter Olson, for the tagline. Music by Hannes Brown. See you next time.